This conference will now be recorded.
Welcome, everybody. Today we're going to talk a little bit about business insurance. And what you don't know can hurt you. First, I want to talk a little about the different types of business insurance. This doesn't include everything, but it's the main ones that most people would be looking at. General liability, property, work comp, and auto, most businesses would need. You can see the whole list there, and I will run through them in detail. General liability gives you the coverage to protect your business if there's anybody is injured by something your business does, or is injured on your premise, or any of your products or the operations that you're doing would injure anybody. That is your protection. Typically, you buy $1 million of liability coverage as a starting point. And then you buy levels above that. Remember, this coverage is protecting your business, but you're really buying this coverage in case something happens. Also, there is a defense and investigation that's included in this coverage. So if somebody accuses you of injuring them, then there's the claims adjuster would do an investigation to see if you're really liable or not. And if you are, and if it goes to court, then there would be the defense costs. Those are included in this coverage. General liability coverage is always based on either the sales of the business, the payroll of the business, or if it's a building that you rent out, say you own an apartment building, you rent out, would be based on the square footage of the apartment. Property coverage, buildings that you own or that you rent, you may or may not be required to insure the landlord's share by contract. That happens quite often. You'd also want to insure your business personal property, which is all of your stuff. All the furniture, tables, chairs, desks, files, computers, furnishings, wall hangings, everything. May also include what's called betterments and improvements, which is the improvements that you as a renter would do to the landlord's building. Maybe you remodeled the bathroom and made it better with all new facilities or fixtures. You can protect that. In case there was a loss, you would be paid for the loss. And then along with property coverage is where you pick up your business income, extra expense coverage. You have a small fire in your business and you are down for 3 months because of smoke and water damage. This is where the coverage kicks in to cover your loss of income, and then secondary to cover the extra expense for the cleaning crew that you had come in to clean. If there's any questions anywhere along this, let me know. We will take them. Workers' compensation and employer liability coverage. That's the second part of this coverage that we forget about. Protects the employer if an employee is hurt on the job. Also covers the employee's lost wages and medical expenses. It is a state law that you have to carry this on all employees. The IRS has made it very clear who's an employee and who's an independent contractor. That's where you follow the guidelines. There are a few exceptions to work comp. The farming industry can pay a certain amount of wages for labor without having work comp. And there are some exceptions for family members and the officers of a corporation. Family members of a business and the officers. But you need to be careful if it's a corporation, because a corporation doesn't have family.
I was going to ask, how about an LLC? Is that?
LLC is a corporation.
Okay.
Or a limited liability company, it can be either or. But yes, you've got to be careful. So mom owns a limited liability company and has her 20-year-old child working for her. That child is her child, not the corporation's child. So that person needs to be covered by workers' compensation. Does that help? Auto coverage. protects the business while they're using automobiles in their business use. You also may want to protect the value of that vehicle with comprehensive and collision. And additionally, if it's a small business, the business may not own an auto, but I bet they use an auto for their business use. Then you want to have hired and non-owned auto coverage. Let's use the same example of that LLC. Well, mom uses her personal vehicle every day on behalf of the corporation to run and get the mail and buy supplies. There's an auto exposure to the business that can be easily protected. Flood insurance, our world and its weather are changing. We didn't talk much about flood insurance in Renville County 10 years ago. It's becoming a more common topic all the time. When we see large rainfall amounts, floods can happen. It's getting easier to purchase, especially in the rural areas and outside of city limits. Several years ago, you couldn't purchase it unless your community was in the flood program. There's private flood insurance now, which has a lot more flexibility. There's still the government flood insurance also. But remember, when you buy flood insurance, you also want to protect your business personal property. You get 2 feet of water through your store, the flood insurance protects the building. You've got to make sure you add the business personal property where all the goods inside are damaged. Crime coverage, very good little piece of coverage, quite inexpensive. Usually we're talking $250 to $400 a year. Protect against employee theft, forgery, and impersonation fraud. Becoming quite common for somebody to get an email that says, hey, next payroll, the boss has switched banks and he now wants you to put it in this account. If the payroll person doesn't confirm that and just makes the change, it might be impersonation or fraud. It's happening more common on a regular basis. Employment practices liability. Right away, let's jump to the first bullet, the Me Too movement. And employment practices liability not only protects the company if there was wrongdoing, but it protects and defends against allegations of wrongdoing. Age discrimination, of course, racial discrimination, sexual harassment. And you also want to make sure that you include here coverage for when your employees harass somebody who's in the business, in the business for purposes. Best example is the UPS driver. And the receptionist tells him every day what nice legs he has. That is harassment. And the business needs to have the coverage to protect themselves if they are sued. Directors and officers liability. This is a must for any nonprofit or any for-profit company that has a board of directors or shareholders. It's become a little harder to get or purchase high limits on this since the pandemic, because remember, it was the directors and officers and corporate board that made the decision on how their company was going to handle the pandemic and sending people home or allowing people in their facilities. They could stand to be sued if they make a wrong decision. Here's a question.
So if you ever have like a single member LLC, you do whatever, you chop firewood and deliver it. As the sole employee, the sole owner, do you need a policy like that for directors and owners?
In that example, you would not, because you don't have any directors or officers. You have the officer. You could still be accused of making bad decisions, but usually it's only going to affect you not your employees, not the shareholders. So, if anybody out there sits on a board, any kind of board, you want to make sure that you're protected by the directors and officers policy of that entity that you're on the board of. Otherwise, if there was an incident, it could roll to your personal liability. And you really don't want to bring that home. Disability insurance, short-term or long-term? Short-term, think up to 90 days usually. Long-term, 90 days to a couple of years. This is important, and it varies a lot by industry. Industry and what they're actually doing within that industry. If you work in an office, your chance of being disabled long-term are generally less than if you're a logger cutting trees. You can see the difference. Disability insurance has changed a lot in the last several years. A lot of companies have gotten out of the business. A lot of companies have gotten into the business. And the courts are still shaking out what exactly a disability is and what classifies as a permanent or temporary disability. But the insurance industry is coming up with new ways to protect against a disability, so there are more types of policies available.
What do you hear about, especially related to COVID, where long-term disability, where this is kind of came out of the blue 18 months ago, give or take?
Good question. How does COVID play into disability? We don't know yet. Courts are looking at cases, and as they go through the court system and then are possibly appealed, it will change how disability insurance looks and how it's sold. And I don't know how that's going to turn out. There are people that make claims against it. And there are, when you buy general liability or property insurance or workers' comp insurance, the policy forms are virtually all universal. The whole industry uses pretty much the same policy. Disability insurance, it's usually the company's policy, and the language varies from policy to policy or company to company. So there's a lot of unknown here. There'll be better definitions of what a disability is 5 years from now. Key employee life insurance. Very important coverage to have. You've got a small manufacturing company. You have one engineer on staff or one draftsman. What happens if you lose that person? What would it do to your business? Think of the cost of recruiting, hiring, and training a replacement. You're a small company. You as the boss were already gainfully employed. You didn't have time to spend several months getting a replacement. Having some life insurance on those key people, your managers of your different locations, this insurance is quite inexpensive also. It can be real valuable to keeping small companies going when tragedy strikes. Cyber liability. This is the fastest growing by far. You read the paper every day about hackers and data compromise. Most companies have it available, just you have to ask for it. And the coverage is changing from year to year. I hope nobody out there is using Windows 7 anymore. All support for that ended in January 2020. That is open to a lot of vulnerability. You want to, when you get cyber liability coverage, you buy first party coverage, which protects yourself. and third-party coverage, which affects anybody whose data was compromised or injured. And then in case you're wondering, the second party would be the insurance company. That's how the contract is written, the insurance policy is written, with the three parties. It is law that if you have a data breach or you have a computer that was compromised, you are required to notify everybody who can potentially be affected. Think of the cost in manpower to contact all those people. It could time your office considerably. One more slide on cyber. This is just the cyber complaints filed to the FBI. Just the ones that get to the level where the FBI needs to be involved. These aren't your everyday mom and pop sales rep left a computer in a backseat type stuff. This is international or national hackers. It's exploding. So this is something you definitely want to have some coverage for. And like I said in the last slide, just ask. It doesn't matter how small the company is, you're using a cell phone or a laptop. You have data that can be compromised quite easily if they have. Or if somebody you do business with gets hacked. That's how some of the latest ones have happened. One of your vendors or one of your customers. Any questions? This is a short and sweet presentation today. We didn't want to bore you with business insurance, but we wanted to create some interest. Questions? Yes.
What do you know about ransomware? And excuse me, in my line of work, working with local units of governments, I know a city over in eastern Minnesota that got hit by ransomware. They're insured by the League of Minnesota Cities Insurance Trust and a lot of that stuff. And I'm sure you folks working for the cities, what are you hearing about that for private business, Joe?
It's happening, and they're paying. I don't remember off the top of my head the figure that JBS paid the meat packer when they were compromised here 6-7 weeks ago, but it was multiple millions. And my concern with that is, so they extort the money from you, they get the payment. Why don't they come back an hour later and lock it up again? You still don't have any protection. If they're good for the first 10 million, let's go back and get the next 10. It's becoming very profitable for these hackers. And you got to work with people on your IT side to make sure that you are protected. If you're a small business and don't have an IT department, work with somebody who knows their stuff that can ensure you're protected and secure. Any other questions?
Or at least it does in here. So, umbrella coverage. If you are a business owner, either a single member LLC or you've got half a dozen or 100 employees, what kind of umbrella coverage helps protect the owner? Something like that.
Well, umbrella coverage is just what it says. It's an umbrella, so it goes over something. When you purchase general liability, like I said, $1 million chunk, and you purchase auto insurance at $1 million of liability, and you purchase workers' compensation at $1 million of liability, if you want higher limits than that, and that's a very good idea, you purchase an umbrella, and that goes over the top of all of your underlying liability limits. When that first $1 million on your general liability is used up, then you move into your umbrella.
So if you got $1 million liability policy and then you have an umbrella on top of that, something happens, you get sued for $2 million, they win. The first $1 million is for that liability and the umbrella takes care of the second.
Exactly right. And what drives the numbers behind how much you should have? Remember, liability always involves somebody being injured. So we're talking medical expenses. And if anybody can get their arm around medical expenses and how much they cost and how much long-term care is going to be for that injured person, you should have an umbrella that's $1 million bigger than that. Some of the worst ones we see, one example I've used before, the roof on a theater collapses during a movie showing. How many people were injured in the movie theater? How many medical claims do you have? You've got employees out there on the road every day driving their vehicles. They're an electrician going from place to place and they don't see a minivan in a blind spot and pull out in front of or T-bone a car and there's 4 people injured. What are the medical bills going to add up to in that incident?
How does errors and omissions insurance, for somebody who, like me, does economic development, how does that all play into that?
Errors and omissions insurance is for, and the first word of that everybody forgets is professional errors and omissions. So that is what economic developers, insurance agents, lawyers, doctors, those type of people purchase errors and omissions. That's when you flat out make a mistake. Usually it's less involved in somebody getting injured and more somebody being harmed. I didn't insure your house and it burned down, but you asked me to insure it through my agency. My errors and omissions coverage would have a claim against it and you would be paid for your house.
Does a typical umbrella cover above and beyond on that, or can you get an umbrella above and beyond that, or how does that work?
Errors and omissions policy would stand outside. That would be outside, and you could buy that $1 million chunks.
Got a question? You talk a little bit about best practices for insurance and contractors. We work with a lot of contractors, and that's from Heather.
Good question, Heather. When you're working with an independent contractor, as the business owner, you want to make sure that they have general liability insurance. If your independent contractor is not carrying levels equal to yours, your business is automatically going to provide it for them free of charge if there's a claim. And nobody wants to do that. That is also one of the things that the IRS looks at to see if they're a true independent contractor. Are they purchasing their own insurance? So you want to get a certificate of liability insurance annually for that from that independent contractor. Very good practice for your business to follow.
We chatted a little bit about this before with COVID. I remember when everything just kind of flew up here, March or so of last year. A lot of businesses were concerned about if, like a meat packing plant or something, there's a super spreader kind of event in their business. What have you been hearing for specific riders or related to COVID? Anything like that?
Good question, Jordan. Disease is typically excluded in most insurance policies. Most companies have come back with an attachment laying that out in more clear language on a separate sheet. It's also been an issue, business income coverage. Does it cover me when the state of Minnesota shuts my business down for COVID?
Bars, restaurants?
Short answer is no, because business income coverage is triggered by a physical claim. Your roof blew off. You had a fire. In most policies, there has to be some kind of claim to trigger the business income coverage. There again, there are cases that are in the court system right now. The NFL being the biggest one. They're claiming that their insurance policy should pay for their lost season. I don't know how that's going to turn out. It's up to the courts to decide. Any other questions online or in person?
Online, not seeing any more at the moment. Maybe do a last call.
Last call for questions. I also have my contact info up there. If anybody's got any insurance questions, don't hesitate to get in touch with me. Well, there's so much difference from one industry to the next as far as what coverages are needed and what coverages you should have, that it's best to work with a trusted advisor one-on-one and get your business properly protected. Any other questions? I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in and for coming. Hope you all have a great day. Thank you.
And thanks everybody. Thanks everybody for joining us on our Renville County HRA EDA Lunch and Learn. Again, we do this on the second Wednesday of every month. We move it around. Since COVID, we seem to be getting more folks watching online, which is absolutely awesome. Just knowing that if we're in Franklin today and you're coming from Sacred Heart, it's quite a drive. So I foresee us continuing to do a hybrid model for the foreseeable future here. So thank you once again on behalf of Renville County. Have a great day, and we'll have this video posted on our website here in the next week or so. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
This conference will now be recorded.
Awesome. And then I had it on my phone, listening to everything coming through in time delay to make sure somebody wasn't asking a question. Oh, this is crazy. Awesome. Awesome job. What's that? I'm a fat man. Of course I'll join you for lunch. Awesome. Great job, Joel.
Glad you guys didn't throw.
You and I have to have a conversation.
Yes, ma'am. Sorry, I apologize. It has been nuts with Farm Fest. Oh, what's up? I'm in trouble now?
I might have something for you.
Right. I need to have an insurance agent present during this conversation.
No,
This would be a good idea.
Yeah, exactly, in case I end up in a body bag.
this is what I really